Hello, I'm Karina Yapor. Thank you for being with us in this special coverage. The death toll following the terrorist attacks by Hamas has risen to at least 1,300 people, including 27 American citizens. Israel has asked the United Nations to evacuate 1.1 million civilians from the north of Gaza within 24 hours. Several U.S. officials are now in Israel. To discuss the situation, I want to welcome Mr. John Ratcliffe, former Director of National Intelligence. Thank you so much for being with us today. Do you believe this request from Israel to the United Nations means that they are planning to enter Gaza on the ground?
I do, Karina. I think that a ground war in the Gaza Strip is something that was really a foregone conclusion once Hamas initiated these attacks last Saturday morning. Obviously, Israel has the legal justification at this point to respond to the war crimes that have been committed against more than 1,000 of their citizens, and I think they're going through the final preparations to do so. They're issuing warnings to civilians to clear the area, something that very clearly Hamas didn't do, and they're taking every precaution to do this, within the international community norms for wartime activities and response, but very clearly in a very short period of time, Israel will respond to the Gaza Strip, and I fear that ultimately it will annihilate much of that territory as a means of retribution.
Mr. Ratcliffe, unfortunately, several hostages were taken by Hamas. What are the chances of recovering them alive?
Well, we have the best hostage rescue teams here in the United States, both in our special operations forces as well as FBI hostage rescue teams. And I know that there have been conversations from our government with the Israelis, who obviously themselves are very experienced in hostage rescue taking. Having said that, the lay of the land and the topography within the Gaza Strip, the ability of Hamas to move hostages in an underground tunnel system is going to make recovery very difficult. Very clearly, Hamas took these hostages to create leverage and to create bargaining to deal with both the Israeli government and the United States government, because we know that there are at least a number of U.S. hostages involved with that. And unfortunately, the Biden administration has shown that they are willing to negotiate with terrorists. Recently did that in exchange not just of hostages for Iranian prisoners who had committed crimes here in the United States, but also the payment of $6 billion.
Exactly. And I wanted to ask you about it because this is being very controversial. How can the Biden administration justify making $6 billion available to Iran in just weeks after all of this is happening? Do you believe this move from the Biden administration has had an impact on what we are seeing right now in Israel?
I do. They can't justify it, Karina. It's a catastrophic decision. You don't negotiate with terrorists, and very clearly this has played out quickly. The inescapable and unfortunate truth here is that as the Biden administration trusted the Iranians, sat down with them in hostage negotiations, and offered them $6 billion, at that very moment, the Iranians were planning to take more hostages, these Israeli and U.S. hostages. By working with Hamas, very clearly, no Hamas activity takes place without either the direction, approval, or funding of the Iranian regime. And so, even as that negotiation was taking place, Iran was planning this. They played the Biden administration, and the Biden administration, set a terrible precedent, saying that we'll pay as much as $1 billion per hostage. And now Hamas and their primary financial benefactor, Iran, has 150 of them at least.
That's terrible for sure. And we have heard from some legislators that have asked the Biden administration to refreeze those funds, but at this time it's not clear if they will be able to do so. Well, some reports say that the Iranian foreign minister visited Lebanon and met with Hezbollah, Hamas, and Palestinian Islamic United. They say that they are supposedly planning a multi-front attack on Israel. How dangerous do you believe this could be, not only for Israel, for the United States as well?
Well, there's not just reports of that. So representatives of Hamas and Hezbollah on the Sunday following this attack publicly acknowledged that they had met 2 weeks ago in Beirut with members of the IRGC and the Iranian regime, and that Iran had actually greenlit this operation that has this atrocity that has taken place, which is just incredibly troubling, and further evidence that the Biden administration has taken the wrong approach by trusting Iran, negotiating with Iran, and enriching Iran to allow its proxies to engage in this kind of activity. And so I think this is a harbinger for further danger and frankly terrorism at the hands of on a multi-front approach. We've already seen Hezbollah now engage Israel from the north, and the full expectation is that other Iranian proxies in Syria and Yemen will follow suit. Obviously, there are protests and what they're calling a day of rage in support of this atrocity in Yemen and in other places in the Middle East right now. All of this, I think is, again, a harbinger of terrible things to come. And unfortunately, things that would have been avoidable had there been strong leadership out of the White House.
Well, I recently talked to the former Subsecretary of Defense, Roger Pardo-Maurer, and he told me that he was worried about the U.S. sending all these resources overseas and somehow being more vulnerable here at home. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't fault the Biden administration for showing support for Israel by sending the Gerald Ford class aircraft carrier and strike force, into the Gulf region. But frankly, showing support at this late date, it should have been showing support for Israel, that we would have had their back in this type of operation for the last 2.5 years. And unfortunately, what we've seen instead is, a significant amount of daylight between the Biden administration and Israel, while on the other hand, the Biden administration constantly courting and at times begging the Iranians to negotiate with them on everything from nuclear talks to hostage negotiations. And, so this is under the category of, too little too late from the Biden administration in terms of a response. And clearly, I think that they have opened us up to threats here within the homeland because of supporters of the Palestinian movement and Hamas here in the United States, and actors on their behalf who are either have been in this country before or who are part of the somewhere between 8 and 11 million illegals that have come into this country through our southern border during the Biden administration.
Yes, and that was another question that I wanted to talk to you about, because just last fiscal year that just ended this September, almost 3 million immigrants crossed the southern border illegally. Do you believe that this makes America more vulnerable to an attack?
Unquestionably so. Because even within those numbers, and I think those numbers are understated and underreported, it's millions and millions, that much we know. But we also know that at least 150 individuals apprehended at the border are on the terrorist watch list. And those are folks that are trying not to get caught. So the number of bad actors, just in addition to folks coming into the country illegally, but that are on a terrorist watch list because they have threatened harm against the United States and pose a real danger. The numbers that have come in the United States, are frankly hard to calculate. We just know that it's a significant number. And, I fear what actions those individuals will take in support of Hamas and the Palestinian movement, in the days and weeks and months to come.
Sure. Mr. Ratcliffe, in the last couple of years, we've seen how several nations, enemies of the United States, have strengthened relations. China and Russia, for example, and at the same time, those nations are strengthening relations with Latin America. China and Russia, for example, and at this time, those nations are taking over Mexico and Latin America. Which strategy should the U.S. take to protect its backyard?
Well, we can talk about strategies, and they're important. The problem is this Biden administration has failed to execute on any good foreign policy strategy. So, we're kind of talking about this in a vacuum. They've taken the wrong approach in Afghanistan. They've taken the wrong approach in Eastern Europe. They've taken the wrong approach with regard to the Middle East, and they've taken the wrong approach regarding Mexico and Latin America. And we're vulnerable, and the world is a less safe place because of the Biden administration strategies. What they should be doing is what they should have done from the beginning is continue to follow the policies of the prior administration, which were so successful and worked so successfully in protecting our southern border, but also in improving our relationships with Mexico and with Latin American and even South American countries. And, when there's a void in leadership or a vacuum in leadership, that's where evil comes in. And you're correct. Both Russia and China have taken advantage of the fact that there has not been strong leadership and support of the United States for Mexico, our Latin American partners and allies, and those in South America. And, and you've seen China and Russia take advantage of that.
Unfortunately, that is happening. I just was recently covering the end of Title 42 at the border in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, and I learned that China is even buying land on the Mexican side of the border. So we should be watching closely. We have seen several demonstrations of Russia and China even patrolling together. So for sure, we have to pay close attention to what's happening right now. We want to thank you for being with us this morning and for all the for all the information that you shared with us this morning. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for watching. Don't forget to visit us on voz.us.